Well, to honor everyone's time, particularly those who showed up a little bit early or right on time, guess we can get started. Can you see me? I have my screen. My screen is showing. We good to go?
Yep.
Okay. So I'm Risa Shimoda, the Executive Director of the River Management Society, and Angie Furman is here too, the coordinator of the River Training Center. And we're thrilled to talk about a topic that is related to this incredible picture that you see in front of you. Environmental justice on the river, where is it? And we're pleased to have Stephanie Stroud from the National Park Service here, and we'll have her introduce herself in a minute. Before we get going, just wanted to mention, if you haven't attended a River Management Roundtable in the past, they're on the second Tuesdays of the month, pretty much always. And anyone is invited, they're free. And we are likely to see the types of folks that you see on the screen. State and federal river managers, planners, watershed people, scientists, outfitters, and students from a number of schools around the country.
Hi, everyone. As Risa mentioned, I'm Angie Furman, and I'm the River Training Center Coordinator for RMS. And just want to remind everyone of some group agreements and norms today as we're having some discussion. We like these roundtables to be interactive, where you can ask questions, whether in the chat or we have time at the end to have some discussion, and you can come off mute. But just want to remind everyone to be respectful of one another and also contribute to the process and try to keep comments relevant and allow space for everyone to share. So you can read those there. You've probably seen these before. And again, as Risa mentioned, we're super excited to have Stephanie Stroud joining us. And so I'm going to pass it over to you, Stephanie, to go ahead and introduce yourself and take it away.
Hi, yeah, thank you so much. I'm so honored to be here today. My name is Stephanie Stroud. I am a community planner with the National Park Service in the Rivers, Trails, and Conservation Assistance Program. I'm currently located in Western Mass, about 2 hours west of Boston. And before that, I was actually out in our Pacific West region based out of Seattle. So you'll hear some examples of environmental justice work from there. I use she, her pronouns, and yeah, just excited to have really just a conversation with you all today. Thanks those for sharing in the chat where you are located. I know some of my colleagues are on the phone today, so I'm excited to be here with them as well. So really just looking forward to a very honest conversation with you all. And I really wanted to start just by understanding how folks identify or what they think of when you hear the term environmental justice. What does this mean to you? What does this look like for what you're working on? So feel free to share in the chat what that term means to you or what comes to mind. And if folks want to come off mute and share as well, I'd love to hear from you and what your experiences is with this is. We'll just give folks a moment to share.
Yeah. You want me to go back, Steph?
I see ensuring that all have access to positive environmental experiences. Oh, and I'd be curious too, if you actually haven't had much experience with environmental justice work, and this is maybe your first or one of the first times that you're really diving into this topic, feel free to raise your hand That way we know who's new to this subject area too. So hearing experience within the context of NEPA and oil field development in Alaska within subsistence use areas for several native villages. It's a very interesting context for this work. And then EJ, meaning the action of trying to right an injustice and preventing excessive impacts to communities from environmental burdens. All great responses. And it sounds like a pretty wide range of different experiences too. So maybe feel free to continue to share in the chat and we can move on to the next slide.
Okay, I think I moved on to the next slide for you.
Oh, okay. I'm seeing the EPA definition here now.
Okay.
So that's great. Yeah, so this is one definition that I know I've referred to as a federal partner for environmental justice. And there's a lot here, I think, but there's a couple important points that I think are helpful. And the first section of this is fair treatment, meaningful involvement of all people. And that's for the development, implementation, and enforcement of laws, regulations, and policies for the environment. So meaning as a federal partner, it's our job to make sure that all are really at the table and represented when making planning decisions. And then the second piece, fair treatment, meaning that no population due to policy or economic disempowerment is forced to bear the disproportionate burden of negative environmental impacts, pollutions, poor planning decisions. So based on this definition, I think our role as federal partners and those who are coming to help communities with making planning decisions are really trying to fix what has failed before us and in times before us, and fixing poor policy decisions that have resulted in disempowered communities and communities that have to bear this burden of environmental impacts and that have been excluded either intentionally or unintentionally from the planning decisions. So really, I see us as kind of fixers to try and make up for what has not been environmental justice in the past. And this is just one definition I've looked to before, but there are others out there, and maybe you have a good one that you'd recommend as well. And then the next slide. So have folks seen this graphic before? You can raise your hand if you have. Just be curious. So maybe not. There are other variations. Yep, like the baseball fence. There's that one too. I have used this one because I think, well, I like the imagery of the tree, but it also gets to justice in the definition as well. And at first, when I saw this graphic, I thought there's like, a lot to be desired, and you could probably have an entire seminar on this graphic, just trying to dissect it and understand it. But I hope you'll bear with me as we go through some of these definitions here, and maybe you could use your imagination a little bit to see how you would change this graphic as well. And it really helped me to put some actual practical examples to what these mean. And I'll read the green font too, so you could see that a little bit better. So the top left, inequality, that is basically where we are right now, right? Unequal access to opportunities. So you see these two folks underneath the tree, person on the left is getting some fruit, person on the right is not, and they're wondering what's going on, where's my fruit? So inequality. And for us at the Park Service, we see some communities have neighborhoods that do not have access to parks, or for you all, maybe that's access to their local river. So that is the current state that we are in now. And then for equality, so that means, and that green font there is evenly distributed tools and assistance. So you see that there's been an intervention here with the two folks getting fruit from the tree, and they've each been given a ladder of the same height to reach the tree so that they can better access the fruit. So what does that look like in our interventions with environmental justice? Well, I've seen an example of equality that I would say is in the state of Connecticut, and that is all folks in Connecticut are able to access their state parks for free. So it's free entry to their state parks, which I think is a great opportunity and a wonderful thing that the state could offer their residents. But it doesn't get to the root of the matter, right? So there's still people that live in communities that don't have any access to parks, but at least they could access their state parks for free. But they might not have a vehicle to get to their state parks. They might not know about their state parks. They might not have time or resources that could allow them to go to their state parks. So that, I think, is an example of equality. There's more increased access maybe, but as we look at the example, person on the left is now getting even more fruit, and the person on the right is still not accessing fruit from the tree. So equity, and that green font says custom tools that identify and address inequality. So we see with this example for equity that there's been some assessment here. Someone has realized that the person on the right needs a larger ladder to access the fruit. So that person actually is given a larger ladder to help with that gap to reach the fruit. And the person on the left has the same size ladder. But as we see in the photo, the person on the left is still accessing plenty of fruit, and the person on the right is getting a little bit more, but not nearly as much. So I think that is a great illustration of this concept of equity. And one example I've seen was out in Washington State, and this was around the city of Seattle. And residents from a neighborhood without access to parks in the city of Seattle were given a free shuttle to popular trailheads outside of the city. So maybe a great opportunity for a lot of folks that they had this free shuttle that brought them to trailheads so they could go hike for the day and then come back. Again, it didn't address the structural issue that they didn't have parks in their own neighborhoods, but they would have access to the outdoors through this shuttle program. So it addressed some of the issue, but it really didn't get to that structural problem. Where we get to the structural problem, that is when we think about justice. And that green text under justice says, fixing the system to offer equal access for both tools and opportunities. So I can also not read that green text pretty well, actually. So residents in a neighborhood without parks, in a justice example, were given resources to create a park in their neighborhood. So that addressed the structural problems there. Their neighborhood didn't have any parks, and they were given access to tools and resources so that they could create their own park on their own terms. And we look at this illustration for justice, and we notice the structural problems have been addressed. So now you see the tree is straightened and there are support systems. One could argue that the tree is also benefiting from that because the tree has fruit on all sides now. So hopefully the tree is healthier as well. And the two fruit harvesters are both getting plenty of access to fruit there, and they have the same height of ladders. There doesn't need to be a person with a larger ladder at this time. Things are more of an equal playing field. So that is what we hope for I think, when we strive for justice in our project work, is that we can help address those structural problems and fix them in a way that is beneficial for all. So I hope that helps paint a little bit of a picture. And again, I know these graphics aren't super perfect, but maybe just give an idea of what all these different terms mean and how we could possibly interpret them. So I just have a few examples to share with you all today of some things that I've worked on that I thought were justice projects that got to that core justice issue. And I guess I'm curious, are folks pretty familiar with the concept of redlining? Okay, great. Sounds like we have quite a few yeses. So I won't go into the big backstory about redlining, and that's great. So this is a redlining map from Seattle. So you see the red neighborhoods of primarily communities of color that were redlined, and then the blue that were primarily white communities that were given resources in the 1930s. So today I'm hoping to talk about D5 in the center there, and also D8. So this is the history of why some of these neighborhoods looked the way they do today. And thank you for circling those. That's great. So the next two examples come from Seattle and are from, we can think back to this map for that. So the first one is actually, it was a project with the Wing Luke Museum of the Asian Pacific American Experience and also the Northwest African American Museum. So they were both telling the story of redlining through their exhibits, but they wanted a way to work together since it was a nice coincidence. They both would have these exhibits at the same time. And so they reached out to us, and because we are a recreation focused program, we decided to do a walking and biking tour and really help them kind of share this history of redlining. And maybe there are similar ways that you all, for your rivers, could share important history that happened in the surrounding communities that, that leads them to look how they do today. So I share this knowing that it's a little bit different than working on rivers, but I think the history and the storytelling piece was really important here. And so you could see this was the trail that we helped map out. So that was just literally me getting on a bike and figuring out which routes were safest for walking and biking and mapping them out. And then we gave them the suggestion of having what we called an anchor site in every kind of small portion of the trail. So that would just be a place where people could go use the restroom and learn more information about the trail, and have someone knowledgeable kind of point them in the right direction. So those are the little hearts you see on this map here. So really, it was just a walking trail. If you were to go out there on the street, there wouldn't be much around that you would know you were on the trail unless you had a tour guide from one of these museums. And eventually, hopefully, we're hoping that they're going to have plaques and other things up. But at this time, it's really just on the street with a tour guide. And this is on the Wing Luke Museum website now, so you can get a sense of what that tour group could look like. And one of the major reasons why they wanted to have this trail tour was for multi-generational storytelling and really bringing up that history of redlining that caused so much strife in these neighborhoods, but also some really interesting benefits too. And as you can see in this crowd, there's people of all ages and backgrounds really coming together to talk about this history in a really unique way. And they can go to these sites and experience these things firsthand. And one of the big issues that this community faced was gentrification. So as you can imagine, Seattle is a very expensive place to live, and this would be a very attractive, affordable neighborhood. But there's some really painful history as to why it was more affordable. And so they were really hoping to talk about those things, especially for people who maybe just moved to the neighborhood, didn't know much about Seattle's history, and really share with them the impacts of gentrification. So that was a really interesting takeaway I had, was that the importance of multi-generational storytelling. And then as a federal partner, an outsider coming into this community, I helped provide maps, I helped facilitate meetings, and then I also, like I was saying, went out there and mapped out safe walking and biking routes. And that is that project. The second one is that Delridge neighborhood. So that was D8 on that redlining map. So this was another community that had that history. And when we started working with them, they had a lot of neighborhood flooding. They didn't have a lot of good infrastructure. Again, this community wasn't really invested in. And they had some zoning issues. So that I thought was really interesting. So this was a residential neighborhood. It was zoned residential. You would think that makes sense, but it made it really hard for them to have a grocery store because they couldn't have a commercial grocery store in the neighborhood because of the zoning restrictions. So that was something that we were really thinking about, and our partners were advocating for changing the zoning. It also had half the residents that were people of color, many different languages spoken, which made the community really rich, but it was also very important for communication to make sure that we were translating materials. High poverty rates and chronic disease and obesity rates, also highest rates of physical inactivity. And that's because there wasn't very much sidewalk infrastructure, wasn't very safe for walking, and then folks really didn't have access to destinations that they could get to easily. So by creating a park in this neighborhood, we could hopefully reverse some of those health impacts and try to make for a healthier community. And then really talking about the history as to why some of these things look the way they did was really important so that we could start to address some of those structural barriers. So we really just helped put together this document you see on the right, a community health profile, which really was just a summary of a lot of this information. So as a recreation planner, I really didn't know that I would be putting together health data. That was kind of a surprise, but putting this together was really illuminating because it really helped me understand some of the impacts of previous policy decision that led to where this neighborhood was today. Thank you. So some of the main takeaways there, using data to tell stories was really powerful. So that document on the previous slide, that helped this community get $300,000 worth of grants. And it really was just putting that data together to tell the story of why the neighborhood looked the way it did. And that was really helpful for them. They were able to do this concept plan, which you see the wetland, which could absorb a lot of the water from the streets and prevent flooding. Also has a gathering space and food gardens. So we didn't help design that. My background is landscape architecture, but this didn't seem like an appropriate project for design work for us because the community really had a lot of great designs about what they were thinking of. And it really helped address a lot of the issues like the food desert, just a place for gathering, which became a community hub and a community that had lots of different languages spoken and lots of people from different backgrounds. Great, thank you. And then, so my last example on the other side of the country, this is one I'm working on now, and this is in Cambridge, Mass. So, and sorry, that map might be a little hard to read there, but Cambridge is right outside of Boston. And this project is located on the Mystic River in the Boston area. So and they call it Alewife Brook Reservation. I'll just clarify, in Massachusetts, we use the term reservation. It means park. I think it's an older term, but just so folks know, it's not a Native American reservation. So this is a park where it's actually a stormwater wetland. So kind of what my previous project is hoping to become over time. But it also has some really unique challenges. And you can see it's really pretty. It's a great bird watching destination. There's a lot of really big residents nearby and a lot of tech companies in the area. Thank you. So currently I'm working with a colleague, Elizabeth, on this project, and we're trying to understand the needs of the groups that are working on this reservation, and really how to improve the health of the environmental justice communities nearby. So on paper, this project is a success because this little pond here and little river that you see on the map, this is pulling in stormwater, it's treating it, it's beautiful. Lots of people access this park for bird watching. You can see all the different species on the map. It is a really beautiful wildlife area, and people use it every single day for walking and biking. But what we know, because of the partners we work with, is that there are environmental justice communities. If you look in the bottom right corner of that map, there's you can almost make out 3 little buildings, and those are big high rises that I'll talk about in just a moment, with a lot of residents in there. Yes, thank you. And they have a lot of poor health outcomes. So we're trying to understand how the reservation could better serve those communities. And so we went back in history to understand what this used to look like. And it was called the Great Swamp back in the day, pre-settlement. And that is because this area, like much of the Boston area, was really swampy. So as you can see, it's been highly developed since then. So flooding makes sense for this area. And we have 2 major highways that kind of are slicing north and south and east and west. We also have a railroad, and we have a public transit station, the Alewife MBTA. So that is our light rail system in Boston. So a lot of transit happening. There's also shopping centers, tons of residents, and it's really hard to kind of access this reservation if you don't know it's there. And it really is tucked. You can see there's a triangle between those corridors, the highway and the railroad, of where this is. And if you don't know it's there, it's really kind of hard to find. It's hidden. And we see that folks don't really access it as much as we were hoping. Also, the water quality, even though this is a stormwater treatment site, is still very poor. And there are combined sewage overflow days where it's just basically a lot of poop in this river. So you can imagine it's not a very safe place to be if you maybe have little ones or dogs that want to run into the water. Doesn't smell very pleasant. We hear a lot of interesting stories. So there's that big concern too. And with more flooding events on the way, there's a lot of concerns about it getting even worse. So those are some of the challenges that we have just with the reservation itself that we're still thinking about as we move forward here. So today, our goals, my team and I were using this history and our data to tell the story of the brook. And then we're going to reach out to our community partners, which we're in the process of doing now, and learn how we could improve health of the environmental justice communities. So one thing we heard today is that the environmental justice community in North Cambridge is disproportionately impacted by heat, and their representatives are working really hard to find solutions for alleviating those really, really hot days. So how can the Alewife Brook be that relief for those communities? And so that is another layer that is starting to rise to the top for us as we look at this project. So we're just compiling historic information. We're going to do a historic timeline, a graphic one that could be used not only in documents, but maybe as murals so folks can understand it as they're walking around. We're going to be gathering community health data, and we're reaching out to those partners to see what solutions and priorities that they have. So just to kind of wrap up my section here, what is justice? I think it takes a village. And for me, I have to constantly remind myself that we are focused on straightening that tree, providing structures that provide relief for some of the inequalities that we see. So for me personally, it's consistently naming the big picture problems. So yes, we are in this situation today because of redlining, because of racism, because of whatever it might be in the communities that we're working in. We have to consistently bring up that big picture reason why things look the way they do. And a lot of the partners that we work with, they're focused on their day-to-day, especially nonprofit partners. They have a very, very busy schedule. They're working on projects and they're hustling for grants. So I see, are the voice that is constantly kind of bringing up those structural barriers. We also provide tools like the data, the maps, the pieces of the story that help share why we live in the communities we do today. And we have a historian on staff who's really helpful at kind of bringing up those key pieces of information. And there's a lot of local historians and communities we work with too that have tons and tons of information. It's just distilling that story. Why does this community look the way it does? Is it highways? Is it railroads? What is it? And those are the things that we should be talking about instead of thinking about maybe the short-term solutions. We need those too to help while we figure out the long-term pieces, but we can't forget some of the main reasons why we are looking at communities the way we do today. And big piece, making sure everyone's included in this conversation. So one of the first things we do when we go into a community is we look at the demographics to try and understand who lives here. What are the ages of people that live in this community? Are we only talking to certain age groups? Do we need to engage youth? Do we need to engage maybe certain populations who haven't been represented in this planning process yet? So, and if not, how do we reach those groups? That's one of the big things that we're always asking. And then solutions only when asked for help. So, like I said, I'm a landscape architect. I love doing designs for parks, but I'll only help with that if it makes sense. And I try not to provide solutions, but rather ask more questions and see what solutions are already in the communities that we've been working with. So oftentimes they have amazing, incredible ideas, and they just need someone to help get them out. So if we can be that partner, that is a great honor and privilege for us. And that's it for my section.
Well, I'll just kind of chime in here with something that's close to where I live, and it's outside of DC, and this is the cover photo, but is one kind of stellar example of what was not so great and what is being remedied by exactly a process that Stephanie has described. The Anacostia River comes in from the east to meet the Potomac River in DC. And it was at one point called the East Branch of the Potomac. But the name was changed when the whole downtown DC and mall were being designed and built. It was subject to lots of dredging. There was a lot of infrastructure, mills and factories and so forth, a lot of military building that was going on. So a lot of things that were contributing to kind of a polluted and very congested river. But the name was changed. And when the city was plumbed, and not surprising, all the people who worked in these factories and so forth lived on the southeastern part of the DC area along the river. And when the city and its environments were plumbed, all the poop was plumbed into this one part of the river. And guess what? It was like mainly, underserved people of color. This is what the river looked like as recently. This is actually better than it looked around when I moved here in 2001. There was so much garbage in the river, you couldn't see water. And if you took a canoe trip, your guide would say, don't touch the water. If you touch the water, we'll have to call 911. It was like that 20 and a couple of years ago. And 2024, they're planning to and have full plans to celebrate a swimmable Anacostia River. They've done so much work. A lot of trash cleanups, a lot of traps, debris traps, but the biggest contributors have been closing the outfalls. And the last sewage outfall of raw sewage coming into the Anacostia was closed 2 years ago. So now they have these monster wastewater treatment plants. They're doing a great job. And this river is nothing like it was, just 20 years ago. But it's taken a lot, and it's taken both the work of advocates, those who live on the river. Notably, one guy who talks about teaching himself to swim, but in order to get to the river to teach himself to swim, he had to walk through a landfill. But he did. So people like that have been been the basis for the story of the reemergence of the river as a clean one. But it's taken the political will. So all the federal agencies and local jurisdictions have contributed. But it's definitely taken a village, and the lead organization is this Anacostia Watershed Society. So it's a great story, but it's just a large example of what has happened elsewhere, not just on this river, but in a lot of other urban settings. Yeah, so there are a couple of examples of how terrible it was, and there are all sorts of ways that this is just I don't know if you can tell the picture. So the left part of the fork flowing southeast is the Potomac, and the Anacostia is coming in from the northeast into the Potomac, flowing southwest into the Potomac. It's definitely an urban area, but the programs that have been developed to clean up trash, we had one of the first bag taxes in the country, where you're encouraged not to use plastic bags, but the bag tax has gone towards debris traps. And within a year or two, plastic bags will be banned altogether. It's just a nice story of success. Go ahead, Steph.
Great, thank you. It's interesting to see what policies are effective, like the bag tax. Yeah, really interesting. So I was curious if you had some ideas about how this can apply to what you're working on in your community. Is there something that you're curious to learn more about? Yeah, I think we can turn this into a discussion if there are any questions or thoughts that have arisen while we're presenting today. I'd love to hear from you all.
Feel free to just take yourself off mute or raise your hand. We can call on you. The group isn't that big. We can just chime in.
We do have one question. I'm wondering if there are studies done that have evaluated barriers to access to water trails, not just perceived barriers, but data that demonstrate actual barriers. Yeah, I'm curious about that too. So would that mean access to certain points where folks can put in on the river? I'm thinking about maybe folks that don't have time or income to participate in recreation activities. Also just not having a vehicle to be able to drive to access points. I'm wondering if anything like that might be some of those data-driven barriers you're bringing up. And that is Tali. Hope I'm saying that right. Language barriers on interpretive signs.
This isn't a data-driven example, but a big change driven by a master plan, forward-thinking master plan on the South Platte River that goes through Denver. There's a greenway that goes several miles through the town from south to north. It flows backwards kind of through Denver and several communities. And in the process of doing a master plan, those who were from 2 different counties and the state and the Colorado Water Conservation Board realized that there were barriers to access in low-income people of color communities, in that there was no place to get on the river. If you wanted to get on the river, you had to jump off the bank through trees. There just were no access points. And it was kind of horrifying. And the first reason, this is maybe 15 years ago, they came up with was, well, we don't want to have access to the river there because those people can't swim. Well, that didn't really help, but those conversations resulted in a reestablishment of, improved access, multiple access, and much better situation. These are right, I would say, let's see, just upstream of downtown Denver, just downstream of the power plant of these communities, if you're familiar with them. But it took the master plan with people thinking from a 30,000 foot, okay, what do we do better?
We have a comment from Kai. As a planner, I think it's important to better consider how we structure access to public meetings, the spaces we meet in, the time of day we schedule public meetings, etc., and how those dynamics may feel unwelcoming to other voices or communities of interest. I think it's something that we forget about sometimes in our planning. Yeah, absolutely. And I wonder if folks have some good examples of ways they've been able to include others that maybe isn't a public meeting or a space.
I also see that Andre has his hand up.
Well, actually, I'll quickly comment. I had a comment in the last part of the conversation, but I do have something to add to this as well. So I guess just for formality's sake, Andre Sanchez y Jamel, I am an organizer with Cal Wild. So we work statewide and mostly focus on public lands issues around Forest Service and BLM stuff. To some degree with NPS as well, but a little bit much more minor. But in terms of having different kinds of opportunities for meeting, actually that's something I really have been pushing for folks who might be familiar or unfamiliar. California is the first state to have the 30 by 30 goal, if you're aware of that, be something we're trying to achieve. And since the inception of trying to meet that goal, I've really been trying to continuously make that a point when engaging with state leadership, state officials, that the meeting times need to be, at times that folks who aren't available during like regular business hours can actually attend. Particularly when I was doing some of my original organizing, it was around the Central Valley. And a lot of the community is ag labor, not to say everyone is, but that's a large portion of it. And, obviously they're not available to attend a public meeting during the business hours. And so really tried to elevate that, and actually mentioned, something related to language earlier in terms of interp signs, but that aspect as well, making sure that there's actually interpretive services provided during meetings. So for any Spanish speakers, particularly in the area that I was working on originally, or otherwise, making sure that there's different languages available, or even like ESL languages, obviously, as well, in that. But anyway, going back to that first part I was going to comment on in terms of are folks familiar with examples, and I guess I'll just keep it short since I know we kind of have moved on, but not an NPS area, but I know that the NTR, I always forget the acronym, but I'm sorry, the trials group that you're a part of, Stephanie, or Steph, sorry.
The Mystic River Watershed Association, is that what you're thinking of?
No. So out here in California, this is a state park or state wildlife refuge, but San Joaquin River, long story short, there's a state park that essentially the only way you can access it is via boat. Meanwhile, the San Joaquin River obviously is like a, quote unquote public resource. You can't access the entire state park unless you essentially come in via boat. The only somewhat accessible point is off of a major country highway, and the sides of the highway are not conducive to, pulling off and being there safely. So elements like that, it's like, okay, you protected a tract of land, but now how are people going to get to it? So kind of, in the conversation of planning, making sure that those considerations are taken in. And sorry to have rambled for so long.
No, that's great. I think you brought up a lot of really, really good points. And I think it's an ongoing challenge about being able to be as inclusive as possible. And often the folks that are the hardest to reach are the exact groups that we would love to speak with the most and get feedback from the most and need to hear from the most. So I think it's just an ongoing challenge. And yeah, I remember kind of proposing a series of suggestions of meeting opportunities for some groups, and our community partners just said, no one's going to come to that. That sounds, like boring, or there's just no way that this group is going to be interested or available to do that. And they would change our suggestions. And I remember being so grateful for that, because what first suggestion I had was a walking audit of a neighborhood, and the community partners turned it into a walking club, and that was so popular, and people really came out for that, and really enjoyed participating. And they met on Sundays, and that was a different time, but I think just really relying on community groups is especially helpful to understand what good ways there are to meet with people. And yeah, just being very flexible with your time to be able to do that is so important. And maybe others have some good examples of how they've been able to work with groups. I see.
Tally's hand is up, but also.
Yeah, hi, sorry. I had a lot going on. My kids are watching Titanic in the background, and I thought if I unmuted, I didn't know what y'all were going to be hearing. But But yeah, so about barriers, I guess one of the questions I had, well, we just have some stuff going on in Pennsylvania, kind of trying to figure out what does DEI and environmental justice kind of mean. And then maybe I'm taking this sort of away from EJ and kind of more into the DEI world, but like, what does that mean for our water trails? And I was looking at some responses to questions and grant applications that people have put about making their events more accessible. And, you know, one organization would say something like, well, if we get your grant, then we will make a portion of the tickets for the event discounted or free. So that was like how they were going to address a barrier, thinking that like cost of participation was a barrier. Now it makes sense that that's a barrier. And I guess going back to what I had asked before, like, is that an assumed barrier, or do we know for sure, you know, that there's people that don't come to these events because they can't afford to? And then like somebody else was saying about trying to reach the people that, you know, the hard part is reaching the people that we don't all the time engage. And so if you just put on your website that some of the tickets are reduced cost or free, but the people that you're trying to reach who might need that resource aren't the people going to your website. So like, is that enough? It's a start, but I don't know. So those are kind of some of my questions. And then I have been thinking a lot about, again, a lot of the events that we're hosting on our trails. And again, sorry, I'm taking this in the DEI kind of world, but, you know, just thinking about access and, you know, like having a sign language interpreter do the safety briefing, you know, so that like a mom doesn't have to sign maybe to her, you know, deaf child or something like that. But again, I feel like I might have derailed us a little bit.
Yeah, I think those are all very important considerations. And you bring up a lot. And I wonder about the reduced price question. And your question is that something that would actually be effective for reaching a certain group? I guess I wonder, do you have someone that you're partnering with, like an organization that works with specific groups you're trying to reach and has made that suggestion? Or
yeah, I don't know. I'm planning to host sort of a conversation webinar with my kind of we'll call them water trail managers, and kind of sort of ask that same question, but I want to be a little careful not to like put them on the spot. You know, I don't want to be like, yo, what made you think that was a good idea? But, you know, generally that's one of my questions, Steph, is when you decided that maybe that was going to address inclusivity at your event, was that just an idea that somebody of means sat around at a table and said, well, maybe people aren't coming because they can't afford it? Oh, okay, let's or you know, offer discount tickets. I mean, are you getting that information from the population you're trying to help, or are you just sitting around a table thinking what other people might be thinking, or trying to come up with, you know what I mean? But I want to get at that, but I have to just be diplomatic in how I approach it, I guess.
yeah, I think you have some good questions, and hopefully there's a sensitive way to ask. But yeah, just curious how they came up with that suggestion, or if they had some data that they were using. So certainly there's plenty of data out there that we look at, census information about low income communities, but like you're bringing up as well, a reduced cost might not be an effective way to bring new folks to the webinars and information that we're sharing. Maybe there's something else that needs to be considered as well. I see there's a lot in the chat too. And about engaging kids to educate their parents and community. Karita has some good information. Yeah, just see, we have 5 more minutes. Do you have anything Risa and Angie.
Well, I think we can probably, yes, thank everyone for being here. And let's see, what am I gonna do here?
Yeah, I was just going to remind everyone that we are recording this and we will put this on our YouTube channel along with where you can find a lot of other roundtables that we've done, a lot of other videos. There's a ton of information there. So I encourage you to go check it out and subscribe so you'll see new videos, but we will also be emailing this out to everyone. And then just a reminder of some upcoming events that we've got going on. RMS is part of the A- Collaborative, and the A- Collaborative is hosting a webinar series from now through November. And our next session is going to be understanding, preventing, and addressing. Well, our next session is going to be just checking in. Feedback is an essential skill in the outdoors, and it's part of our series that's all about understanding, preventing, and addressing sexual harassment on rivers. So that's free. You can find that on our calendar to go register, and I can also put a couple links here in the chat. And then also, we've been having a Wild and Scenic River Training Series. We have our final session for that next week on June 21st, and we're going to be looking at visitor use management on wild and scenic rivers. So I also encourage you to go to the RMS or the River Training Center website, and you can find more information about where to register for that. And then I think Risa just put it into the chat there. Just take a minute and let us know how we're doing. Here's a form to a survey, and we've been looking at these survey results, and we take everything into account while planning future roundtables. So we'd love for you to just take a moment and share your feedback with us.
Well, thank you on behalf of Angie, myself, and Steph. Thank you so much for being here today, and thanks everyone for attending. And we have 2 minutes for any last questions. And otherwise, we'll hopefully see you again at a roundtable or webinar or other RMS event.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me today and for everyone who shared their comments. I really appreciate it.
And I don't know if she's the person is still on, but somebody had written L. Kelly had said something about in the chat that I thought was interesting, and I don't know if that person is still on.
Yeah, L. Kelly is Lon Kelly. I don't hear you. You can come off mute, Lon. Maybe
Or not.
he's in Alaska.
Okay, sorry. Well, thanks. This was interesting.
Okay, I'm off mute.
Callie, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I'm just curious what you said. Most river managers have wondered, is it just that so few users of rivers I work on are people of color? If it's not, am I responsible to encourage participation? I just kind of was curious more about that.
Well, if you look at the picture that Risa put up of the RMS, they're all white folks. And, you know, all my life, I've moved further west and further north and farther away from the issues that you're dealing with in these urban settings. And I've been very aware of the lack of participation in the things that I do, whether it's fishing and hunting and in stream fishing and hunting and skiing and hiking, boating, by some of the big communities in our country as a whole. And if you look at the resource management profession and how most of us work in rural-ish areas, at least I think most of us do, out west, and my whole career, which is over, I worried about, or I thought about, you know, this dichotomy between what I do, which is provide thoughtful development and management of opportunities for white people, that are used by white people. And particularly once I moved to Alaska and saw the very different ways that Alaska Native people, particularly rural Alaska Native people, use wildland resources versus white people who are more urban. This whole issue of environmental justice just seems really a rich thing to think about, but I don't think we've got our hands around it. And another example is that on the North Slope, some of the small villages, which are relatively, they're not poor, but there are a lot of really poor people there, feel put upon to benefit more of the have people in the Native community up there. And, you know, I've been to meeting after public meeting where local people, particularly old people, are crying and, you know, they just feel devastated by what's happening to their traditional lifestyle. And it's definitely an environmental justice issue. And we surfaced it as such when we were doing planning, and which is ongoing even now. But the government, you know, has developed over what, 50 some years, and a way of looking at environmental impacts that's pretty well thought out, but we haven't really looked at these social justice impacts in a way that I think makes a difference. Am I making any sense?
I feel like we're in a stage of kind of waking up. We have a lot of work to do. Feel like we should wake up pretty quick to start working on what we hadn't been doing for the last 300 years, but your thoughts are really appreciated, Lon.
Peace.
Yeah, I think the conversation too around, you know, these rural communities that have primarily white demographics and thinking about environmental justice. Yeah, it's hard because it looks so different from urban areas. But I think there are still plenty of things to consider around environmental justice in rural, primarily white areas too. You know, from kind of pollution issues to different income brackets being able to access the river. Yeah, I think it looks very different from urban areas, but there's still lots of things that we should be considering as well.
Well, I guess unless there are other questions, we can kind of call it an afternoon. Appreciate everyone joining us today. Thank you so much. Thanks again, Steph.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a good day.